Well, welcome to Whole Bible Study with your host, me, Tad Inoue. So far in our journey through Leviticus, we have encountered a wide range of laws and rituals that reveal how Israel was called to live in covenant relationship with God. We begin with sacrifices, burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, and sin offerings, and guilt offerings, each with its own meaning and purpose. We saw how the priesthood was consecrated with Aaron and his sons set apart to minister in the sanctuary. We also explored laws about ritual purity, what is clean and unclean in food, in childbirth, in disease, in bodily discharges. These rules may have seemed at first very technical, but as we have seen, they communicate something profound. Every part of life belongs to God, and nothing is outside the sphere of holiness. Now, at the exact center of Leviticus, and arguably the entire Torah, we come to one of the most profound and dramatic chapters, Leviticus chapter 16, which lays out the Day of Atonement for Yom Kippur. This chapter serves as the theological hinge of the book, bringing together the themes of sacrifice, priesthood, holiness, and forgiveness into one extraordinary ritual. For the live reading, go to Bible Building Podcast. The chapter begins with a reminder of a tragic event, the deaths of Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, who offered unauthorized fire before the Lord and were consumed. Their story underscores the danger of entering God's presence in the wrong way. The text emphasizes that Aaron cannot simply enter the inner sanctuary whenever he wants, but only in the way prescribed by God. The Hebrew word for atonement that dominates this chapter is kippur. Its meaning is to cover or to cleanse. In its theological sense, it speaks of reconciliation, the removal of impurity, and the restoration of relationship. From this root, we get the word Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The chapter describes how the high priest, once a year, makes atonement not only for himself and for the people, but even for the sanctuary itself, because impurity and sin affected not only individuals, but also the dwelling place of God. The ritual is elaborate. Aaron must first bathe and put on simple linen garments. Normally, the high priest wore ornate vestments with gold, precious stones, and colorful embroidery. But on this day, he appears only in white linen. Many interpreters note the symbolism here. On the most sacred day, the high priest strips himself of splendor and stands before God in humility. Now, as Jacob Milgrom, one of the foremost scholars of Leviticus, observed, the linen garments signal that this ritual is not about priestly grandeur, but about penitence. John Dominic Crossan also notes that the high priest becomes a representative of human vulnerability, clothed in simplicity as he enters God's presence. The high priest begins by offering a bull as a sin offering for himself and his household. This acknowledges that even the mediator must be cleansed before he can intercede for others. Next, two male goats are brought before the Lord. By lot, one is chosen to be sacrificed. Its blood is used to cleanse the sanctuary. The other is designated for Azazel. The Hebrew phrase Azazel, the meaning of Azazel, is one of the greatest puzzles of this chapter. Some ancient interpreters thought Azazel was a wilderness demon, a rival spiritual power. Others suggested it was a rugged, remote place. Still others read the word as symbolic expression, meaning complete removal. In the book of 1 Enoch, Azazel is portrayed as a rebellious angel who introduced corruption to humanity. George Nicholsburg, an expert on Second Temple Judaism, notes that in this latter literature, the scapegoat ritual is a cosmic struggle. But in Leviticus itself, the focus is on removing sin from the community. One goat dies to cleanse, the other carries sins away. The sacrificial goat's blood is brought into the sanctuary. Aaron enters the Holy of Holies, the most innermost chamber where the Ark of the Covenant rests. On top of the Ark is the Kaporet, the atonement cover, or mercy seat. The high priest sprinkles the blood on the Kaporet and in front of it, cleansing the very center of God's dwelling. The Kaporet is a loaded symbol. Its name comes from the same root as Kippur, linking it to covering and atonement. Dr. James Tabor, a historian of ancient Judaism and Christianity, has pointed out that this ritual is about cleansing the meeting point between heaven and earth. Without this annual purification, impurity would accumulate, and God's presence might withdraw. Before entering, Aaron also creates a cloud of incense to cover the mercy seat. The Hebrew word for incense here is ketoret. The smoke forms a protective veil, preventing Aaron from seeing the full radiance of God's glory and perishing. The literary device at work is repetition. The careful instructions about incense, blood, and sprinkling are repeated almost verbatim throughout the chapter, underscoring the gravity of exact obedience. In this ancient world, incense was widely used in ritual, but in Israel, it is tied to holiness and reverence, not magical manipulation. Then comes the scapegoat ritual. Aaron lays both hands on the live goat, confessing over it that all the iniquities of the Israelites, all their transgressions, all their sins. The Hebrew words are worth exploring. Avon means guilt or inequity. Pesha means rebellion or trespass. And shatat means sin or failure. By piling these terms together, the text covers every possible form of human wrongdoing. This piling up is another literary device, intensification by accumulation. Aaron symbolically transfers the nation's failures onto the goat, which is then led into the wilderness. The wilderness is described as Eretz Gersha, Eretz Gerera, meaning a desolate or cut off land. The goat carries away the sins, never to return. This act provides not only theological reconciliation, but also psychological relief. The community sees its sins removed in a visible ritual. Now, Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton, has observed that these rituals like these function to give people assurance that forgiveness is real, that the burden of guilt is lifted. The Day of Atonement also includes atonement for the altar and the tent of meeting. Even the sacred objects must be purified because they exist in the midst of an imperfect people. This reflects an ancient worldview where impurity is contagious. Sin is not only a personal matter, but something that can defile the community and even the land. The priest makes atonement for the sanctuary so that God's presence can continue to dwell among Israel. The chapter concludes by establishing this as a perpetual ordinance. In the 10th day of the 7th month, Israel is to, quote, afflict themselves, which later tradition underscores as fasting, and to cease from work. The phrase used is Shabbaton, meaning a Shabbat of complete rest. The people are reminded that atonement is not achieved by their own labor, but by the mercy of God enacted through the priestly ritual. This is the only time in the year when the high priest enters the Holy of Holies, marking it as the most sacred moment in the Israel calendar. Historically, this ritual became the foundation of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish year. In the Second Temple period, it was performed with great solemnity. In Jerusalem, after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, Rabbinic Judaism reinterpreted atonement through prayer, repentance, and acts of charity. The Mishnah in Tractate Yoma preserves detailed memories of how the ritual was performed, down to the color of the thread tied to the scapegoat. Now, rabbinic tradition honors the holiness of this day by focusing on confession and renewal. As the rabbis said, quote, for transgressions between a person and God, the Day of Atonement brings atonement. For transgressions between a person and his neighbor, the Day of Atonement does not bring atonement until he has made peace with his neighbor. For Christians, Leviticus 16 has been foundational for understanding the death of Jesus. The New Testament letter to the Hebrews interprets Jesus as the true high priest who enters the heavenly sanctuary, not with animal blood, but with his own, once and for all. The cross is seen as the ultimate Day of Atonement. Yet, as Marcus Borg and Dominic John Crossan both remind us, this is not about replacing Judaism, but about reinterpreting shared symbols within the early Jesus movement. The themes of cleansing, humility, and forgiveness are continuous across traditions. Anthropologically, the scapegoat ritual has parallels in other cultures. In Hittite rituals, for example, impurities were symbolically transferred to animals or objects and then banished. The difference in Israel's case is theological. The scapegoat is not a bribe to another deity, but an enacted symbol of God's grace and removal of sin. The ritual makes visible what cannot otherwise be seen: the release of guilt, the cleansing of the people, the renewal of the covenant. Now, theologically, Leviticus 16 teaches us that sin and impurity are real forces that damage relationships, communities, and even the sacred spaces. But it also proclaims that God provides a way for renewal. The high priest, stripped of grandeur, enters trembling into the Holy of Holies, bearing blood as a sign of life, incense as a covering, confession as a release. The sanctuary is cleansed. The people are forgiven. The sins are removed. The community begins again. This chapter embodies the rhythm of grace. Impurity accumulates. Atonement is made. Life is renewed. Literally, the chapter is structured with careful symmetry. Instructions and actions mirror each other. Key words like kippur, atonement, dam, blood, and shatat, sin, are repeated, creating a rhythm that underscores the gravity of the ritual. The use of paired goats dramatizes the theological truth through narrative, contrast. One dies, one departs. This is symbolic storytelling at its most powerful. Now, in closing, Leviticus 16 is not merely a description of an ancient ritual, but a profound meditation on human need and divine grace. It shows us that holiness is not about perfection, but about renewal, that God does not abandon a sinful people, but provides a way to cleanse and restore. It honors the seriousness of sin while magnifying the mercy of God. This is why this chapter sits at the heart of the Torah. It is the beating center where covenant, holiness, and grace converge. Well, thank you for studying this powerful chapter with me. May its message of cleansing, forgiveness, and renewal inspire you to approach God with humility and hope. If this speaks to you, leave a note or share it with a friend. And we'll see you in the next chapter soon.